A very common philosophy that you'll hear parroted in the news media and social media is that you shouldn't have to change. You're just perfect the way that you are, and if anybody ever tries to criticize you or say otherwise, then they're wrong and they should be ashamed of themselves. So, for example, if you're a little overweight, then anybody who tries to suggest that, even in the slightest, is wrong and should be ashamed of themselves, and they're not allowed to speak out against that. I'll give you another example from personal experience. One time I tried to invite somebody out to go see me play at an open mic, and they said, that type of stuff just doesn't really bring me joy. I would rather just stay in all the time. And they didn't want to change that about themselves, and I wasn't allowed to criticize them for that. But I actually disagree with this philosophy. I think that not all change is bad. Some might even refer to it as improvement. So I want to talk through what I think some of the consequences are of this hesitancy to change and to really improve yourself and get out of your comfort zone, and what I think as an alternative you can do to really embrace change and make that a positive force in your life. So we can look at the consequences of a resistance to change, both in terms of how it affects you negatively as well as those around you. So in the former case, you could actually end up harming your health in many different cases. So if you are a little overweight, or you have a poor diet, or you don't go to the gym often enough, and then whenever someone criticizes you and suggests that you should actually change that, you think that they're wrong just by virtue of them criticizing you, then you're just going to end up perpetuating those unhealthy behaviors, and then you're the one that ends up with a drastically lowered lifespan and quality of life. Just because you don't want to change, that doesn't mean that every decision you make is right, or that it's the best decision that you could make for yourself. Now, in addition, you'll pretty much just stay stagnant your whole life, because you'll never learn anything new or grow, become wiser or experience anything new, which begs the question of what's the point of really living in the first place if you're just going to be the same person for the entire 75 or 85 years of life that you have. And also, you'll never realize your fullest potential. And then at some point, after too much time has passed, you'll look back and realize that and wish you had done something different, but at that point it'll be too late. And you'll end up missing out on a lot. On one hand, things that you could very well enjoy if you just gave it a chance, but you never did, so you don't even realize those things are out there. And on the other hand, opportunities for advancement, whether they're things like networking or meeting somebody new, establishing new relationships, because you're not out there getting any practice. And so you'll find yourself in a situation where if you took advantage of it, it could very well benefit you, but you don't have the necessary skills to succeed in that situation. Whether they're social skills, life skills, job skills, you name it. So for example, when I first got to college, I was a particularly antisocial person because I would much rather have just sat in my dorm and watched Netflix all the time, and I didn't want to deal with social anxiety. But it was only because there were a few times where I had no choice but to go out there and be social that I realized that I actually liked it, and I started seeking out more opportunities to do that. And several years later now, I've gotten so much practice with it that I have a much greater wealth of social skills than I would if I just stayed in my comfort zone the entire time. That's helped me to succeed in job interviews, in the workplace, and graduate school, and even building a social life for myself after college where it's not so easy. Now, in terms of others, there are also two very notable consequences. For one, just the impression that you create on others. You come across as a very arrogant, self-righteous person that's going to end up alienating yourself from everybody because they'll realize that you just can't be reasoned with no matter what, because you think that you're always right and they're always wrong. And at the same time, it's going to be detrimental towards your relationships because by definition, a relationship is a contract that somebody enters into thinking that whatever price they pay, they're going to get something in return for that. But if somebody's always showing up for you and you never show up for them because you're too busy prioritizing your own needs and your own comfort zone, then they're just going to get tired and move on to somebody else that they feel values them enough to actually make those sacrifices and compromises, regardless of how comfortable they are with it or not. So if, for example, you're in a relationship with somebody and they say, hey, let's maybe be a little bit more active, come to the gym with me, or let's go travel somewhere instead of just staying in all the time, or take a class together, then there are two ways that you can respond to that. Either you can say, okay, I value you enough that even though something like this might not be something that seems like a great idea for me, something that I would enjoy, I'm still going to make that compromise and do it for your sake. Or you can respond by saying, no, that doesn't bring me joy. I just want to continue being the same person that I am, and I don't care about how that makes you feel. And in the latter case, it's probably not going to work out very well for that relationship in the long term. So there are a number of things I suggest you do as alternatives. The first is to be open to criticism. And that's, of course, easier said than done because nobody likes to hear that they could be wrong, but that's the reality. Nobody's perfect, and it's very possible that you could be wrong and you do actually have changes to make. And not all criticism is created equal, but sometimes it is maliciously intended. but that doesn't mean that that person's wrong. So all you have to do is remove the emotion from that equation and just ask yourself logically, what information is here that I can actually take advantage of? Because then you might actually learn something new. So for example, back in ROTC in college, I remember we did peer evals after I'd been in the program for a couple of years, and I did particularly poorly. So my peers said things like, he's rude, he's awkward, he doesn't fit in. And of course, at first I was taken aback. I was very offended, and that was my response to that. I just disliked them even more than I already did. But it was only until later on that I realized, after taking a closer look, that there was some information I could have gleaned from that. So as soon as I removed that emotion, that initial shock, I realized that if you want people to receive you well, then you kind of have to play the game a little bit. You do have to actively engage with people, get to know them, be friendly towards them, instead of just assuming that sitting off in the corner by yourself and not meaning them any harm is going to make them be positively receptive to you. The other thing I'd suggest is that you be your own critic. So let that voice in your head be the voice of reason, the one that keeps you in check and reminds you that you still have work to do, rather than just reassuring yourself that you're beautiful the way you are and you don't have to make any changes at all. Because that's going to provide you with an incentive to keep working hard and keep making progress. In addition, try new things and keep an open mind. Instead of just dismissing those things because they require change or because you're afraid of them or whatever. Because best case scenario, like I said earlier, you found something that you enjoy, and worst case scenario, you at least have some experience with it, so that if you don't like it and you want to avoid it in the future, you have a much more substantial reason behind that other than just the fact that you're afraid of it. And lastly, always be willing to sacrifice for and compromise with those that you have relationships with. In other words, it's not just always about you. Because if you do take that approach of sacrificing compromise, then people will recognize, again, that you value them enough to do that, and they're going to be much more inclined to do that for you in the future. So in conclusion, I hate to break it to you, but you're not perfect and beautiful just the way you are, just because you like hearing that, and because you don't want to accept any criticism from anybody. We all have work to do, and so you should always be looking for ways to improve and grow, because remember, not all change is bad. So I hope this helps, and I'll see you next time.